Visual records recovered from multiple Imperial campaign archives show a consistent figure operating at the forefront of several high-risk engagements. The picked feeds are often degraded by interference, but repeated frame analysis reveals a Space Marine of heavily reinforced armor configurations advancing ahead of standard formations. Environmental telemetry indicates extreme combat conditions, including high radiation zones, atmospheric contamination, and dense urban war zones with compromised structural integrity. Despite these factors, the subject maintains operational efficiency without visible hesitation or deviation from mission objectives. Eyewitness accounts from Imperial Guard survivors frequently reference a lone Ultramarine breaching enemy lines prior to coordinated assaults. Descriptions remain consistent across separate campaigns, noting calculated aggression, controlled movement, and a pattern of engaging priority targets with minimal delay. Tactical logs suggest a preference for direct engagement supported by adaptive positioning, rather than static command oversight. In several instances, the subject is recorded operating temporarily outside standard squad formations, often rejoining after securing critical objectives or eliminating high-value threats. Recovered Vox transmissions provide limited but notable insight into command behavior. The voice identified in these recordings maintains a controlled tone, delivering concise directives without excess communication. Orders prioritize structural objectives, enemy disruption, and rapid advancement. There is no indication of panic or hesitation even under overwhelming enemy pressure. Machine analysis of speech patterns suggests high cognitive processing speed, with decision-making occurring in compressed timeframes relative to baseline Astartes metrics. Additional reports from Adeptus Mechanicus observers note anomalous endurance levels during prolonged engagements. Energy output readings and armor integrity logs indicate sustained combat activity beyond standard operational thresholds. Maintenance crews report irregular wear patterns on war gear, consistent with continuous frontline deployment rather than rotational engagement. Despite this, the subject's equipment remains functional, suggesting either exceptional maintenance discipline or modifications within acceptable doctrinal limits. In multiple campaigns involving Orc incursions, Tyrannid infestations, and Chaos-aligned forces, the same individual appears in critical turning points. Strategic summaries often attribute localized victories or stabilization efforts to the intervention of an Ultramarine officer matching the subject's description. While official commendations exist, several records show redacted sections, indicating restricted information or classified operational details. Cross-referencing all available data leads to a single confirmed identity within the Ultramarines chapter. The subject is consistently identified as a captain of the Second Company, a position requiring both strategic oversight and direct combat leadership. Genetic markers align with standard Ultramarines lineage, derived from the gene seed of the Primarch Reboot Guilliman. Service duration spans multiple centuries, with recorded participation in numerous campaigns across different sectors of the Imperium. The individual at the centre of these records is Demetrian Titus. Demetrian Titus was born into the rigid and highly structured recruitment systems of the Ultramarines chapter, though specific details of his early human life remain largely unrecorded, as is typical for many Astartes. Candidates selected for the Ultramarines are drawn from worlds within the Ultramar sector, a region governed by stability, order, and adherence to the Codex Astartes. These worlds are characterized by disciplined populations, where martial training and loyalty to the Imperium are deeply ingrained from a young age. It is within this environment that Titus would have first demonstrated the qualities required for selection. The transformation from human initiate to Space Marine involves a series of invasive and highly controlled procedures. Titus underwent the standard implantation of gene seed organs, each designed to enhance physical and cognitive capabilities. These include the secondary heart, the multi-lung, and the black carapace, which allows direct neural interface with power armor. The process is both physically and mentally demanding, with a high failure rate among candidates. Survival alone indicates exceptional resilience and genetic compatibility. Following implantation, Titus would have entered the Scout Company phase, where neophytes are trained in reconnaissance, infiltration, and basic combat operations. This stage emphasizes adaptability, discipline, and independent decision-making. Records suggest that Titus excelled in these areas, displaying early signs of leadership and tactical awareness. His progression through the ranks appears to have been steady, with no recorded disciplinary actions or deviations from chapter doctrine. Upon full ascension to a battle brother of the Ultramarines, Titus would have been assigned to one of the chapter's companies, eventually rising through merit and battlefield performance. The Ultramarines adhere strictly to the Codex Astartes, which outlines organizational structure, tactical doctrine, and command hierarchy. Advancement within this system requires not only combat effectiveness, but also the ability to interpret and apply codified strategy in dynamic environments. Titus's rise to the rank of captain of the Second Company indicates a combination of strategic competence, personal valor, and the trust of his superiors. The Second Company is one of the primary battle companies within the Ultramarines chapter, composed of veteran Space Marines equipped for a wide range of combat scenarios. As captain, Titus would be responsible for both the operational success of his company and the implementation of Codex-compliant tactics across varied theatres of war. Physically, Demetrian Titus conforms to the enhanced physiology of a Space Marine, though reports suggest he possesses a more imposing presence even among his peers. Estimated height exceeds 2 meters in full armor, with mass augmented by both genetic enhancements and the weight of his war gear. His features, while rarely visible outside of ceremonial or medical contexts, are described as stern and defined, reflecting both his genetic lineage and years of combat experience. Scarring is present, consistent with prolonged exposure to frontline engagements, though much of this remains concealed beneath armor. His armor itself is a standard pattern of Adeptus Astartes power armor, modified to reflect his rank and operational requirements. As captain, his armor includes enhanced command and control systems, allowing for coordination with squad-level and company-level units. The armor is marked with the insignia of the Ultramarines, including the Omega symbol and company-specific heraldry. Maintenance logs indicate meticulous upkeep, with repairs conducted promptly following each engagement. Titus's early campaigns are not extensively detailed in publicly accessible records, but available data suggests participation in multiple compliance and defense operations within the Ultramar sector and beyond. These engagements would have exposed him to a range of enemy types, including Xenos species and heretical forces. Each campaign contributed to the development of his tactical approach, emphasizing adaptability and decisive action. One of the defining characteristics observed in Titus's early career is his tendency to operate at the forefront of engagements. While the Codex Astartes allows for flexibility in command roles, many captains maintain a degree of separation to oversee broader battlefield movements. Titus, however, demonstrates a preference for direct involvement, often leading assaults personally. This approach carries inherent risk, but also serves to reinforce morale among allied forces and ensure precise execution of critical objectives. Psychological evaluations, where available, indicate a stable and focused mindset. There is no evidence of excessive aggression or deviation from Ultramarines' discipline. However, there are indications of independent thinking, particularly in situations where strict adherence to the Codex may not yield optimal results. This balance between doctrine and pragmatism appears to define Titus's command style. By the time Titus assumed full command of the Second Company, he had established a reputation as a reliable and effective leader. His decisions are characterized by efficiency, with minimal wasted resources or unnecessary engagements. He prioritizes mission objectives while maintaining the integrity of his forces, a balance that aligns with Ultramarines' principles but also reflects personal judgment. The early life and rise of Demetrian Titus, while partially obscured by the nature of Imperial record-keeping, present a consistent image of a Space Marine shaped by discipline, tested through continuous warfare and elevated through demonstrated capability. His presence in multiple critical engagements suggests not only competence, but a level of trust placed in him by higher command structures within the Ultramarines chapter and the broader Imperium. Demetrian Titus presents a combination of physical augmentation, disciplined control, and adaptive combat behavior that distinguishes him even within the already elevated standards of the Adeptus Astartes. While all Space Marines are engineered for war, Titus demonstrates a consistency in performance that reflects not only genetic enhancement, but a refined integration of training, instinct, and situational awareness. His movements in combat are measured rather than excessive, favouring efficiency over display. Each action appears calculated with minimal wasted motion, suggesting a deeply internalized understanding of both personal capability and battlefield dynamics. A notable characteristic observed in multiple combat records is his resistance to psychological and environmental stresses that typically degrade operational effectiveness. Engagements involving chaos-aligned forces often include reports of warp-induced phenomena, auditory distortions, and visual hallucinations that can destabilize even veteran soldiers. Titus, however, shows minimal visible response to such influences. While this does not indicate immunity, it does suggest a high degree of mental fortitude and discipline. Some reports note that he maintains composure in situations where Allied forces exhibit signs of disorientation or panic, continuing to issue clear directives and execute objectives without interruption. His combat style reinforces this stability. Rather than relying on overwhelming aggression alone, Titus combines direct assault with controlled pacing. He advances with intent, closing distance when necessary, but maintaining positional awareness to avoid unnecessary exposure. This balance allows him to function effectively in both offensive and defensive roles. In close quarters combat, he demonstrates precise targeting of enemy weak points, often neutralizing threats with minimal strikes. At range, his weapon usage reflects controlled bursts and disciplined firing patterns, conserving ammunition while maintaining lethality. The armor worn by Titus serves as both protection and a command interface, reflecting his rank as captain of the Second Company. His power armor is based on a standard pattern utilized by the Ultramarines, but includes modifications appropriate for a company-level commander. The structure consists of ceramite plating layered over a fiber bundle network, providing resistance against ballistic, energy-based, and environmental threats. Internal systems regulate temperature, filter toxins, and monitor biological status, allowing sustained operation in hostile environments. Integrated into the armor is the Black Carapace interface, a neural link that enables Titus to control the suit as an extension of his body. This connection allows for rapid response times, enhanced strength amplification, and precise coordination between movement and weapon deployment. The armor's servo motors compensate for the increased mass, enabling mobility that would otherwise be impossible given its weight. Despite this, Titus's movement remains controlled rather than overly forceful, indicating refined synchronization between operator and system. As a captain, his armor also includes advanced communication systems. These allow him to relay orders across multiple squad channels, coordinate with allied forces, and maintain situational awareness through battlefield data feeds. Tactical overlays provide real-time information on enemy positions, terrain conditions, and friendly unit status. This integration supports his leadership style, which emphasizes rapid decision-making and adaptive positioning. Visually, his armor bears the markings of the Ultramarines chapter, including the Omega symbol and the heraldry of the Second Company. These insignia serve both as identification and as a representation of lineage and authority. Additional markings may denote campaign participation or honors earned through service, though many of these are standardized within the chapter and do not deviate significantly from established tradition. Titus's primary weapon configuration typically includes a bolter, a standard firearm issued to Space Marines but capable of devastating impact due to its use of self-propelled explosive rounds. The bolter's design allows for both semi-automatic and burst fire, providing flexibility across engagement ranges. In Titus's hands, the weapon is used with disciplined control, prioritizing accuracy and target prioritization over volume of fire. This approach aligns with his overall combat methodology, emphasizing effectiveness rather than excess. In addition to the bolter, Titus is frequently equipped with a melee weapon, often a chain sword. This weapon features a motorized chain of monomolecular teeth capable of tearing through armor and biological matter with equal efficiency. The chainsword is particularly effective in close-quarters engagements, where Titus's physical strength and precision allow him to maximize its destructive potential. His use of melee weapons is not reckless. Rather, it is applied when proximity and tactical conditions favor such engagement. Sidearm deployment is also part of his standard loadout, typically in the form of a bolt pistol. This weapon provides a compact alternative to the primary bolter, allowing for rapid response in confined spaces or during transitions between combat phases. The bolt pistol maintains the same explosive ammunition type, ensuring consistency in lethality despite its reduced size. Additional equipment may include fragmentation and crack grenades, each serving specific tactical purposes. Fragmentation grenades are used for area denial and anti-infantry operations, dispersing shrapnel across a defined radius. Crack grenades, by contrast, are designed for anti-armor applications, focusing explosive force to penetrate heavily armored targets. Titus's use of such equipment appears deliberate and situational, avoiding unnecessary expenditure while maximizing impact. Beyond standard armament, Titus has been observed utilizing environmental tools and improvised tactics during engagements. This includes interaction with battlefield machinery, defensive emplacements, and structural elements to gain advantage. Such adaptability indicates a willingness to operate beyond strict doctrinal constraints when circumstances require, while still maintaining overall strategic alignment with Ultramarines principles. One of the more distinctive aspects of Titus's operational profile is his endurance. Combat records frequently show him sustaining activity levels that exceed typical engagement durations. This endurance is supported by both his physiology and the capabilities of his armor, which can administer stimulants, regulate fatigue, and manage minor injuries. However, the consistency of his performance suggests an additional layer of personal discipline, allowing him to maintain focus and effectiveness over extended periods. His command presence is also reinforced through his equipment. Visual identification of a captain on the battlefield serves both practical and psychological functions. For Allied forces, it provides a focal point for coordination and morale. For enemy forces, it represents a high-value target, often drawing attention and aggression. Titus appears to leverage this dynamic, positioning himself in areas where his presence can influence the flow of combat while still maintaining operational control. There are indications that his armor and equipment have undergone repeated repair and recalibration, consistent with prolonged frontline deployment. Maintenance records suggest that while the base systems remain within standard specifications, wear patterns reflect extensive use under high-stress conditions. This reinforces the assessment that Titus is not a commander who remains distant from combat, but one who consistently engages directly alongside his forces. In summary, the distinctive traits of Demetrian Titus are not defined by deviation from Astartes standards, but by the precision and consistency with which he embodies them. His physical capabilities, mental resilience, and equipment integration form a cohesive system optimized for sustained combat effectiveness. His weapons and gear are standard within the context of the Ultramarines chapter, yet their application reflects a level of discipline and adaptability that elevates their effectiveness. Through controlled aggression, efficient movement, and deliberate use of resources, Titus maintains a combat profile that aligns with both Codex doctrine and the practical demands of modern warfare within the Imperium. Demetrian Titus demonstrates a psychological profile defined by restraint, clarity of purpose, and a consistent alignment between decision-making and operational objectives. Within the structure of the Adeptus Astartes, where aggression and absolute loyalty are foundational traits, Titus exhibits a controlled application of both. His actions do not reflect impulsive behavior or unnecessary displays of dominance. Instead, they indicate a measured approach in which each engagement, command decision, and tactical adjustment is directed toward a clearly defined outcome. Observational records suggest that Titus maintains a strong internal discipline, even by Ultramarine standards. He does not rely on extended vocal command presence, nor does he engage in excessive communication. His leadership is expressed through precision. Orders are brief, contextually relevant, and delivered without redundancy. This communication style reduces confusion in high-intensity environments and reinforces a chain of command that prioritizes clarity over volume. Subordinate units operating under his command show consistent adherence to directives, indicating a high level of trust in his judgment. His interpersonal profile, as far as it can be reconstructed from available records, suggests a limited but effective engagement with those under his command. There is little evidence of overt camaraderie or informal interaction, which is consistent with many Space Marine captains. However, battlefield cohesion within the Second Company remains stable, implying that Titus achieves unity through reliability rather than personal rapport. His presence provides a constant rather than an emotional anchor. This distinction is significant, as it reflects a leadership model that emphasizes predictability and competence over morale-driven influence. A recurring element in multiple reports is Titus's ability to operate in conditions that test doctrinal limits. The Codex Astartes, authored by Robuta Guilliman, serves as both a tactical manual and a philosophical framework for the Ultramarines. While many within the chapter adhere strictly to its guidelines, Titus demonstrates a pattern of interpreting its principles with situational flexibility. This does not constitute deviation in a disciplinary sense. Rather, it reflects a capacity to prioritize mission success when rigid adherence may introduce inefficiencies or increased risk. This adaptive interpretation has, in some instances, placed Titus under scrutiny from Imperial authorities. Certain records indicate that his resistance to warp-based influence and his exposure to chaos-related phenomena have raised questions regarding his condition. These concerns appear to originate not from observable corruption, but from the absence of expected degradation. Within the Imperium, such anomalies are often treated with caution. However, there is no confirmed evidence that Titus has exhibited signs of heresy, mutation, or ideological deviation. His actions remain aligned with Imperial objectives, and his service record continues to reflect loyalty and effectiveness. From an organizational perspective, Titus is firmly embedded within the Ultramarines chapter hierarchy. As captain of the Second Company, he operates under the authority of the chapter master and contributes to the broader strategic operations of the chapter. The Second Company itself is a fully operational battle company, capable of independent deployment across a wide range of combat scenarios. Its composition includes tactical, assault, and devastator squads, supported by specialized units as required. Titus's role involves not only direct command in battle, but also logistical coordination, training oversight, and long-term operational planning. His adherence to Ultramarines doctrine is evident in the structure and performance of the company under his command. Engagement records show coordinated assaults, effective use of combined arms tactics, and minimal resource wastage. These outcomes suggest a command philosophy that integrates Codex principles with practical battlefield experience. Titus does not disregard doctrine, but neither does he allow it to constrain necessary action. This balance is critical in modern Imperial warfare, where enemy forces often operate outside predictable parameters. The broader Imperium recognizes Titus as a capable and dependable asset, though not without reservation. His operational history includes interactions with multiple Imperial institutions, including the Imperial Guard and elements of the Adeptus Mechanicus. In these contexts, he functions as both a military leader and a point of coordination between different branches of the Imperium. His ability to maintain efficiency across these interactions further reinforces his role as a stabilizing force within complex operational environments. Psychologically, Titus does not exhibit signs of instability or excessive zeal, both of which can manifest in Space Marines exposed to prolonged combat. His responses remain consistent, and there is no indication of behavioral drift over time. This stability contributes to his long-term effectiveness, allowing him to maintain command integrity across extended campaigns. It also supports the assessment that his resistance to external influences is not the result of suppression or denial, but of inherent resilience combined with disciplined control. It is also relevant to consider the symbolic function of a Space Marine captain within the Imperium. Titus embodies not only the tactical capabilities of the Ultramarines, but also their ideological representation. He serves as an example of what the chapter considers optimal: disciplined, adaptable, and unwavering in service. This symbolic role extends beyond the battlefield, influencing how Allied forces perceive Ultramarines' leadership and how enemies assess their opposition. In evaluating Demetrian Titus as a complete subject, it becomes clear that his significance lies not in singular, extraordinary traits, but in the consistent integration of multiple high-level competencies. His physical enhancements, combat proficiency, and command authority are standard within the upper ranks of the Adeptus Astartes. What distinguishes him is the absence of failure across these domains. There are no recorded instances of significant tactical error, loss of command cohesion, or deviation from mission objectives. This consistency, maintained over extended periods and diverse combat conditions, represents a form of reliability that is both rare and strategically valuable. At the same time, the limited anomalies present in his record, particularly his resistance to warp influence, introduce a level of uncertainty within the rigid structures of the Imperium. These anomalies do not define him, but they do influence how he is perceived by certain institutions. In an environment where deviation is often equated with risk, even beneficial irregularities can attract scrutiny. Titus's continued service despite this suggests that his value outweighs any concerns, at least within the current operational context. The final analysis of Demetrian Titus positions him as a model of functional efficiency within the Adeptus Astartes. He is neither excessively rigid nor unpredictably adaptive. Instead, he operates within a controlled spectrum, applying doctrine where effective and adjusting when necessary. His leadership style reinforces stability, his combat methods ensure effectiveness, and his psychological profile supports sustained operation under extreme conditions. In the context of the Ultramarines chapter and the Imperium as a whole, Titus represents a convergence point between ideal doctrine and practical execution. He does not redefine the role of a Space Marine captain, but he demonstrates its optimal application. Through consistent performance, measured decision-making, and unwavering alignment with Imperial objectives, Demetrian Titus maintains a position of both authority and reliability within a system that demands both without exception. Records attributed to the Adeptus Administratum present Demetrian Titus as a statistically consistent asset within Imperial military operations, with performance indicators that align above expected baselines for a Space Marine captain assigned to an active battle company. Compilation of campaign data across multiple sectors shows a pattern of successful objective completion with minimal deviation from projected timelines. Engagement summaries indicate that when Titus is present within an operational theatre, the probability of localized mission success increases within acceptable predictive margins, though not to an extent that would classify his presence as singularly decisive on a macro-strategic scale. Instead, his influence is most visible at the tactical and subsector level, where precision and timing have measurable impact. Administratum logisticians note that Titus's deployments tend to follow high-risk assignment patterns. He is repeatedly allocated to conflict zones characterized by unstable supply lines, compromised infrastructure, or unpredictable enemy behavior. These environments typically result in elevated casualty rates and reduced operational efficiency among standard Imperial Guard formations. However, comparative data suggests that units operating in conjunction with Titus experience improved cohesion and reduced attrition relative to baseline projections. This effect is attributed not to increased resource allocation, but to more efficient utilization of available assets. Supply chain records associated with the second company under Titus's command show a deviation from typical consumption models. Ammunition expenditure is consistently lower than projected values for equivalent engagement intensity. This reduction does not correlate with decreased combat activity, as enemy casualty reports remain within or above expected levels. The most likely explanation is disciplined fire control and effective target prioritization, resulting in higher efficiency per unit of ammunition expended. This pattern extends to other consumables, including grenades and medical resources, suggesting a broader operational culture of conservation without compromising effectiveness. Transportation and deployment analytics further reinforce this assessment. Titus's company demonstrates rapid insertion and extraction capabilities, often completing mission cycles within compressed timeframes. Administratum records indicate fewer delays related to logistical misalignment, suggesting effective pre-engagement planning and coordination with fleet assets. In several documented cases, Titus's forces have adapted to partial or failed supply drops by reconfiguring mission parameters in real time, maintaining objective focus despite reduced support. The Adeptus Mechanicus provides a complementary perspective, focusing on equipment performance, maintenance cycles, and energy output data. Tech priests assigned to monitor Astartes' war gear report that Titus's armor and weapon systems operate within optimal parameters despite prolonged exposure to high-stress conditions. Machine spirit readings indicate stable function, with minimal instances of critical failure or degradation beyond acceptable limits. This stability is notable given the frequency and intensity of engagements in which Titus participates. Maintenance logs reveal a pattern of consistent post-engagement recalibration rather than reactive repair. Damage to armor plating and internal systems is addressed promptly, preventing cumulative degradation. This approach aligns with Mechanicus doctrine, but is not universally observed across all Astartes units, particularly those engaged in continuous combat operations. The efficiency of these maintenance cycles suggests a disciplined interaction between Titus and the tech marines responsible for his equipment, as well as a respect for machine function that ensures long-term reliability. Energy consumption metrics associated with Titus's armor systems also present an area of interest. Extended combat operations typically result in fluctuating power distribution as systems compensate for damage, environmental conditions, and sustained activity. In Titus's case, energy usage remains relatively stable, indicating controlled exertion and efficient system management. This stability reduces the likelihood of system overload and extends operational endurance, allowing for longer engagement periods without critical failure. Weapon performance data collected by Mechanicus observers highlights consistent firing accuracy and reduced mechanical stress. Bolter systems used by Titus show lower rates of jamming and component wear compared to average Astartes benchmarks. This is likely a combination of proper maintenance and controlled firing patterns. The Chainsword, a mechanically intensive weapon, also exhibits reduced degradation rates, suggesting precise application rather than prolonged or inefficient use. From a broader analytical standpoint, both the Administratum and Mechanicus identify Titus as a force multiplier within defined parameters. He does not significantly alter large-scale strategic outcomes on his own, but his presence enhances the effectiveness of surrounding units and stabilizes volatile engagements. This effect is particularly valuable in operations where resources are limited or conditions are rapidly deteriorating. There are, however, elements within the data that remain less easily quantified. Administratum analysts note that certain engagements involving Titus result in outcomes that exceed predictive models without a corresponding increase in measurable inputs. These deviations are not extreme, but they occur with enough frequency to warrant attention. In most cases, they are attributed to tactical decisions made during the engagement, though the exact variables influencing these decisions are not fully captured in standard reporting formats. The Adeptus Mechanicus records similar anomalies in relation to environmental resilience. Instances of Titus operating within areas affected by warp-related disturbances show less impact on system performance than expected. While his armor provides standard protections against such conditions, the degree of functional stability observed suggests either favorable circumstances or factors not fully understood within current Mechanicus frameworks. These observations are recorded without definitive conclusion, categorized as irregular but not immediately actionable. It's important to note that both institutions maintain a degree of caution in interpreting such anomalies. Within the Imperium, deviations from expected patterns can indicate either exceptional performance or underlying risk. As such, records referencing Titus often include notations for continued observation rather than immediate reassessment. This approach allows for ongoing data collection without disrupting operational deployment. Logistical projections for future engagements involving Titus remain favourable. Administrator models predict continued efficiency in resource utilization and mission execution, provided that current patterns persist. Mechanicus projections similarly indicate sustained equipment performance, assuming regular maintenance cycles are maintained. There is no indication within the data that Titus's effectiveness is declining, or that his operational profile requires adjustment. In combined analysis, Demetrian Titus is classified as a high-efficiency commander whose presence improves tactical outcomes through disciplined execution and optimized resource management. His interaction with both human and machine elements of the Imperial war effort reflects a balanced integration of strategy and function. While certain aspects of his performance remain outside precise quantification, they do not currently conflict with Imperial doctrine or operational requirements. The impressions formed by the Adeptus Administratum and the Adeptus Mechanicus are therefore aligned in practical terms. Titus is not identified as an outlier requiring intervention, but as a stable and valuable component within the larger structure of Imperial warfare. His continued deployment in high-risk environments is supported by data indicating that his presence contributes to the successful resolution of engagements that might otherwise result in prolonged conflict or operational failure. Administratum conflict archives and Mechanicus battlefield telemetry converge most clearly in records concerning the Graia campaign, a large-scale industrial world engagement defined by the rapid escalation of Orc invasion forces and subsequent chaos interference. The planet itself functioned as a major forge world, with extensive manufacturing networks, orbital infrastructure, and a dense concentration of strategic production facilities. Environmental conditions were defined by heavy industrial pollution, unstable power grids, and layered urban structures that restricted visibility and movement. These factors created a battlefield where conventional line formations were difficult to maintain, requiring adaptive tactics and decentralized engagement. Demetrian Titus's arrival on Graia is recorded as part of a limited Ultramarines deployment intended to stabilize critical sectors rather than conduct full planetary reclamation. Initial administratum projections indicated a high probability of infrastructure loss due to Orc momentum and insufficient Imperial Guard reinforcement. However, engagement logs show that Titus immediately prioritized key manufacturing zones, focusing on areas where enemy control would result in exponential increases in Orc production capability. This targeting strategy reflects a clear understanding of logistical warfare, where destruction of enemy supply capacity yields long-term operational advantage. Combat telemetry from early engagements shows Titus advancing through dense Orc formations with controlled aggression. His approach avoids prolonged static engagements, instead favouring rapid penetration into enemy clusters, followed by immediate neutralisation of command-level threats. Orc hierarchy, while less structured than Imperial forces, relies heavily on dominant individuals to maintain cohesion. By eliminating these figures, Titus effectively disrupts local enemy coordination, causing fragmentation and reduced combat efficiency among remaining forces. His fighting style in these engagements is characterized by fluid transitions between ranged and close-quarters combat. Bolter usage is precise, with short, controlled bursts targeting high-value enemies, such as Nob leaders and heavy weapon operators. Once distance is closed, Titus transitions to melee engagement, utilizing a chains word with deliberate strikes aimed at critical points. This dual-phase approach allows him to maintain momentum while adapting to shifting combat ranges within confined industrial environments. Mechanicus data from armor sensors indicates that Titus frequently operates at the edge of optimal engagement distance, minimizing exposure while maintaining offensive pressure. This positioning reduces incoming damage while preserving his ability to advance. Energy distribution logs show consistent allocation to mobility and targeting systems, supporting rapid directional changes and accurate threat tracking. These patterns suggest a high level of synchronization between operator intent and armor function. As the Graia campaign progressed, Chaos-aligned forces entered the conflict, introducing warp-based anomalies and unpredictable enemy behavior. Administratum records describe a shift in battlefield conditions, with localized distortions affecting both perception and communication. Standard Imperial units experienced decreased coordination under these conditions, with increased instances of confusion and delayed response times. In contrast, Titus's operational pattern remained stable. He continued to execute objectives with minimal deviation, adjusting tactics only where necessary to account for new threat vectors. One recorded engagement within a manufacturum core highlights this stability. Titus and a limited force encountered a Chaos champion supported by corrupted servitor units and environmental hazards caused by reactor instability. Rather than engaging in a prolonged firefight, Titus advanced directly toward the central threat, using structural cover to limit exposure. Bolter fire was used to suppress secondary targets while he closed distance. Upon reaching effective range, he transitioned to melee engagement, neutralizing the primary threat before secondary forces could reorganize. This sequence reduced overall engagement time and prevented further environmental degradation. Additional battle records from the same campaign indicate repeated instances of Titus operating independently for short durations. These actions are not indicative of isolation from command structure, but rather targeted interventions designed to resolve critical points of failure within the battlefield. Administratum analysts note that such interventions often coincide with moments where Imperial forces are at risk of losing positional advantage. Titus's presence in these moments correlates with rapid stabilization and subsequent advance. Beyond Graia, fragmented records suggest involvement in other engagements against both Xenos and heretical forces, though details remain limited due to classification or data loss. In these cases, the available information reinforces previously observed patterns. Titus consistently engages at the front line, prioritizes high-value targets, and maintains control over engagement tempo. His fighting style does not vary significantly between enemy types, indicating a generalized approach adaptable to multiple threat profiles. In conflicts involving tyrannid organisms, for example, reports describe similar tactical behavior despite the fundamentally different nature of the enemy. Rather than targeting hierarchical leaders, Titus focuses on synapse creatures responsible for coordinating swarm behavior. This adjustment reflects an understanding of enemy-specific vulnerabilities while maintaining overall combat methodology. Engagement outcomes in these scenarios show effective disruption of tyrannid coordination, leading to localized collapse of swarm formations. Administratum casualty reports across these engagements consistently show reduced losses among units operating in proximity to Titus. While Space Marine presence alone contributes to such outcomes, comparative analysis indicates that his specific command approach further enhances survivability. Units under his direction exhibit improved positioning, reduced exposure to concentrated enemy fire, and more effective use of available cover. These factors combine to lower casualty rates without reducing offensive capability. Mechanicus observations extend this analysis to equipment performance during combat. Weapon discharge patterns recorded during engagements show minimal overheating or mechanical failure, even under sustained use. Armor integrity remains within acceptable thresholds, with damage distributed in a manner consistent with controlled exposure rather than random impact. This distribution suggests that Titus actively manages his positioning to mitigate risk, rather than relying solely on armor resilience. There are, however, elements within these battle records that remain partially unresolved. In engagements involving Chaos forces, certain environmental readings indicate warp activity levels that would typically impair both human and machine function. Despite this, Titus's performance does not show corresponding degradation. His armor systems continue to operate within normal parameters, and his combat effectiveness remains unchanged. Mechanicus analysts record these instances as anomalies, noting the discrepancy without assigning definitive cause. From a tactical perspective, these anomalies do not alter the observable outcomes of engagements. Titus continues to apply consistent methods, focusing on objective completion and threat elimination. However, their presence introduces variables that are not fully accounted for within standard predictive models. Administratum records acknowledge these variables, but do not classify them as disruptive, instead incorporating them into broader assessments of operational uncertainty. In cumulative analysis, the recorded battles involving Demetrian Titus present a coherent picture of a commander whose effectiveness is derived from consistency, adaptability, and precise execution. His fighting style integrates ranged and melee combat into a unified approach, allowing for seamless transition between engagement phases. His tactical decisions prioritize efficiency, targeting critical nodes within enemy structures rather than engaging in unnecessary attrition. The environments in which he operates, ranging from industrial forge worlds to bioorganic battlefields, do not significantly alter his core methodology. Instead, they provide contexts in which his adaptability is tested and confirmed. Whether facing orc warbands, tyrannid swarms, or chaos-aligned entities, Titus applies a framework of controlled aggression, positional awareness, and resource management that yields reliable outcomes. From the perspective of both the Adeptus Administratum and the Adeptus Mechanicus, these battle records reinforce the classification of Titus as a high-efficiency combat leader. His presence does not redefine the nature of warfare within the Imperium, but it consistently improves the execution of operations within his sphere of influence. The detailed accounts of his engagements serve not only as records of individual battles, but as data points within a broader analysis of effective Astartes command in complex and variable combat environments. Administratum continuation logs and Mechanicus auxiliary records expand the Graia campaign into its later phases, where initial stabilization gave way to prolonged conflict marked by structural collapse, resource depletion, and increased chaos manifestation. At this stage, the battlefield transitioned from contested industrial zones to fragmented sectors where control shifted rapidly and conventional front lines ceased to exist. Environmental telemetry indicates that atmospheric contamination intensified, while power grid failures resulted in irregular lighting, localized darkness, and intermittent electromagnetic interference. These conditions reduced the effectiveness of long-range targeting systems and forced engagements into closer proximity. Within this environment, Demetrian Titus maintained a consistent operational pattern, though with measurable adjustments in pacing and engagement selection. Administratum records show a reduction in wide area movement in favor of sector containment. Rather than advancing across large distances, Titus focused on securing and holding critical nodes, including reactor cores, data repositories, and transport junctions. This shift reflects a recognition that maintaining functional infrastructure was as important as eliminating enemy forces, particularly in a Forge World context where production capacity directly influences long-term war sustainability. Combat logs from these later engagements highlight an increased frequency of multi-vector threats. Orc remnants, chaos-aligned entities, and corrupted mechanical units often appeared within the same operational zone, creating unpredictable combat sequences. Titus's response to these conditions demonstrates a layered approach to threat prioritization. Immediate high-risk targets such as chaos champions or unstable mechanical constructs are engaged first, while less coordinated orc forces are contained or redirected through controlled movement and environmental manipulation. Mechanicus data supports this assessment through analysis of movement patterns and engagement timing. Titus's armor systems show rapid shifts in directional output, consistent with dynamic repositioning between multiple threat sources. Energy allocation remains balanced, avoiding overcommitment to any single vector while maintaining readiness for sudden escalation. This balance is critical in environments where threat origin cannot be reliably predicted, and it contributes to sustained operational effectiveness despite increasing complexity. A notable engagement recorded within a partially collapsed Manufactorum complex illustrates this adaptive methodology. The structure, already compromised by prior combat, experienced further degradation due to internal detonations and structural stress. Within this confined and unstable space, Titus encountered a convergence of enemy elements, including chaos-influenced infantry and autonomous defense systems corrupted by hostile code. Rather than engaging all threats simultaneously, he isolated engagement zones by utilizing the structure itself as a barrier. Controlled demolition and targeted fire were used to collapse access points, segmenting enemy forces into manageable groups. Once segmentation was achieved, Titus engaged each group sequentially. Bolter fire was employed to neutralize ranged threats, followed by close-quarters combat to eliminate remaining resistance. This method reduced exposure to crossfire and prevented enemy coordination across different sectors of the structure. Administratum analysts note that this approach not only preserved Titus's operational capacity, but also limited further structural damage, allowing for partial recovery of the facility after the engagement. As the campaign progressed toward its final recorded phases, chaos influence intensified, introducing higher concentrations of warp anomalies and entities exhibiting non-standard physical properties. In these conditions, traditional targeting metrics become less reliable, as enemy forms may not conform to expected patterns of movement or vulnerability. Despite this, Titus's engagement records do not show significant deviation in accuracy or effectiveness. His targeting remains consistent, suggesting either rapid adaptation to new variables or an ability to rely on fundamental combat principles that remain applicable regardless of enemy form. Administratum summaries of these encounters emphasize Titus's ability to maintain command cohesion, even when communication systems are degraded. Vox interference and signal distortion are common in warp-affected zones, yet units operating under his command continue to execute coordinated maneuvers. This suggests a reliance on pre-established tactical frameworks and implicit understanding among squad members, reducing dependence on real-time communication. Such cohesion is indicative of disciplined training and consistent command methodology. Additional records, though less detailed, reference Titus's involvement in engagements beyond Graia, including operations against Eldar forces and other Xenos threats. In these cases, his fighting style adapts to account for increased enemy mobility and precision. Engagement logs describe controlled advances that minimize exposure to ranged attacks, combined with rapid closing of distance to negate the advantages of more agile opponents. This approach aligns with his established pattern of reducing engagement variables by forcing combat into conditions favorable to Astartes' strengths. Mechanicus observations during these engagements note increased reliance on armor mobility systems, with higher output directed towards servo-assisted movement and stabilization. Despite this increased demand, system performance remains within acceptable limits, reinforcing the assessment of efficient energy management and disciplined operational control. Weapon systems continue to function with minimal degradation, even under conditions requiring rapid target acquisition and repeated firing sequences. In terms of casualty and damage assessment, the latter stages of recorded conflicts show a continuation of earlier trends. Units operating alongside Titus maintain lower casualty rates compared to equivalent deployments without Astartes' leadership. Infrastructure damage, while unavoidable in high-intensity engagements, is often contained to critical zones rather than widespread destruction. This containment supports faster post-conflict recovery and reduces long-term logistical strain on Imperial resources. There are, however, final entries within these records that introduce elements of uncertainty. Certain engagements conclude with incomplete data, including gaps in telemetry and redacted sections within administratum summaries. These gaps often coincide with peak levels of warp activity or the presence of unidentified entities. In such cases, Titus's actions are only partially documented, with outcomes inferred from subsequent battlefield conditions rather than direct observation. Mechanicus analysts categorize these instances as data loss events rather than operational anomalies, though the distinction remains subject to interpretation. In each case, however, the immediate aftermath shows restoration of relative stability within the affected sector, implying successful resolution of the engagement despite incomplete records. This pattern reinforces the broader assessment of Titus as a stabilizing force, even in conditions where full analysis is not possible. The cumulative data from these extended battle records presents a consistent image of Demetrian Titus as a commander whose effectiveness is sustained across escalating levels of complexity. His fighting style evolves in response to environmental and enemy variables, yet retains a core structure based on efficiency, control, and targeted aggression. He does not rely on singular tactics, but rather on a framework that can be adjusted without compromising overall coherence. From the perspective of the Adeptus Administratum and the Adeptus Mechanicus, these later engagements confirm earlier classifications. Titus remains a high-efficiency asset capable of maintaining operational stability under conditions that degrade standard Imperial performance. His ability to integrate tactical adaptation with resource management ensures that his presence continues to yield measurable benefits even as battlefield variables increase beyond predictable limits. In final analysis from this combined perspective, Demetrian Titus's recorded battles do not demonstrate unpredictability or deviation, but rather an expanded capacity to operate within uncertainty. His engagements provide data not only on individual performance, but on the application of disciplined command principles in environments where traditional structures are compromised. This consistency, maintained through the most volatile phases of recorded conflict, solidifies his standing as a reliable and effective commander within the Imperium's military framework. Inquisition archive fragments referencing Demetrian Titus are neither uniform nor fully accessible, with multiple entries bearing layered classification markers and restricted access designations. Surviving records originate primarily from Ordo Hereticus and Ordo Malleus, observers assigned to monitor potential corruption vectors during prolonged engagements involving Chaos forces. These records do not present a unified conclusion. Instead, they document a sequence of observations, many of which remain unresolved or deliberately left without definitive interpretation. Initial Inquisition attention appears to have been triggered during the Graia campaign, where exposure to warp anomalies exceeded standard operational thresholds for Astartes units. Environmental readings confirm the presence of chaos-aligned energy fluctuations, including localized distortions in time perception, electromagnetic interference, and non-linear spatial anomalies. Under such conditions, it is expected that even genetically enhanced individuals would exhibit measurable degradation in cognitive or behavioral stability. However, observational data concerning Titus indicates a lack of such degradation. Field reports compiled by attached Inquisition agents describe Titus maintaining consistent operational behavior in areas where other Imperial personnel experienced disorientation, delayed response times, or psychological distress. These observations are recorded without embellishment, often accompanied by comparative data sets showing divergence between Titus's performance and that of surrounding units. Inquisition analysts note that while Space Marines possess heightened resistance to warp influence, the degree of stability exhibited by Titus exceeds baseline expectations. One particular record details an engagement within a warp-saturated Manufactorum sector, where multiple Imperial Guard units reported auditory hallucinations and loss of formation cohesion. Titus, operating within the same environment, is observed advancing toward a primary threat without deviation in trajectory or response time. Vox transcripts from this engagement show no irregularities in speech pattern or command structure, despite documented interference affecting communication channels. The absence of distortion in his transmissions is noted but not explained. Further observations focus on Titus's proximity to warp-affected entities. In several encounters with chaos-aligned adversaries, including those exhibiting visible mutations and non-standard physical properties, Titus engages at close range without recorded hesitation or visible reaction to environmental anomalies. Inquisition observers document the lack of typical sensory disruption responses, such as momentary pauses or recalibration of targeting systems. Instead, his engagement pattern remains aligned with standard combat methodology, suggesting either a suppression of external stimuli or a resistance that is not fully understood. These findings lead to preliminary classifications within Inquisition records, though none are conclusively applied. Some entries reference the possibility of an unusually stable genetic expression within Titus's gene seed, potentially resulting in enhanced resistance to warp influence. Others suggest that his psychological conditioning combined with prolonged exposure to combat environments may have produced an adaptive response. Both explanations are acknowledged as incomplete, lacking sufficient data to confirm or refute their validity. There are also records that adopt a more cautious perspective, noting that absence of observable corruption does not equate to absence of influence. Within Inquisition doctrine, subtle or latent effects are often considered more dangerous than overt manifestations. As such, Titus's stability is treated not only as a strength, but as a variable requiring continued observation. This approach is reflected in repeated annotations recommending periodic review rather than immediate action. One of the more detailed reports originates from an Ordo Malleus observer assigned to monitor warp exposure levels during a series of engagements involving chaos sorcery. The report describes a localized distortion event in which physical space exhibited non-linear properties, including shifting spatial boundaries and inconsistent gravitational vectors. Within this environment, multiple Imperial personnel were rendered ineffective, either through disorientation or physical incapacity. Titus, however, is recorded navigating the area with minimal disruption, adjusting movement patterns to compensate for environmental instability. The observer notes that Titus's armor systems did not register the same level of fluctuation as those of other units, though the cause of this discrepancy remains unclear. Mechanicus consultation included within the report suggests that while standard Astartes armor provides some degree of protection against environmental anomalies, it is not designed to fully negate warp-induced effects. This discrepancy is therefore categorized as an irregularity, pending further analysis. Additional entries reference Titus's interaction with chaos artifacts or objects of potential significance. In one instance, he's reported to have handled an item later classified as contaminated without immediate adverse effect. Standard protocol in such situations would involve quarantine and extensive purity testing. While such procedures are eventually conducted, the delay between exposure and evaluation is noted as a point of concern within the report. Despite this, no evidence of corruption or mutation is identified during subsequent examinations. It is within these moments that Inquisition documentation becomes more fragmented. Certain reports include redacted sections or abrupt terminations, suggesting either loss of data or intentional restriction. Cross-referencing these entries with broader campaign logs indicates that these gaps often coincide with high-intensity warp events or encounters with unidentified entities. The lack of complete information prevents definitive conclusions, reinforcing the cautious stance adopted by Inquisition analysts. Another area of observation involves Titus's interactions with other Imperial authorities. Inquisition records indicate instances of tension, particularly in situations where protocol dictates a more conservative approach to potential corruption. Titus's decisions in these contexts tend to prioritize immediate operational objectives over procedural caution. While this approach yields successful outcomes in terms of mission completion, it introduces friction with institutions whose primary focus is containment and prevention of heretical influence. These interactions are documented in a neutral tone, without explicit judgment, but with clear acknowledgement of the divergence in priorities. Inquisition analysts note that such divergence is not uncommon among Astartes commanders, particularly those engaged in frontline operations. However, in Titus's case, the presence of unexplained resistance to warp influence amplifies the significance of these decisions. As they occur, within a context of heightened scrutiny. There are also references to internal discussions within the Inquisition regarding the appropriate classification of Titus's condition. Some entries suggest that his resilience may represent a beneficial anomaly, potentially offering insight into methods of resisting chaos influence. Others caution against this interpretation, emphasizing the risks associated with drawing conclusions from incomplete data. These discussions remain inconclusive, with no unified directive issued across Inquisition branches. Throughout all available records, one consistent element is the absence of evidence indicating corruption, mutation, or ideological deviation. Titus's actions remain aligned with Imperial objectives, and his conduct does not trigger standard indicators of heretical influence. This absence, while reassuring, does not eliminate concern within the Inquisition framework. Instead, it reinforces the need for continued observation, as the underlying cause of his resilience remains unidentified. In summary, Inquisition impressions of Demetrian Titus are defined by a combination of recognition and uncertainty. He is acknowledged as an effective and loyal servant of the Imperium, whose actions consistently support mission objectives and contribute to battlefield success. At the same time, his resistance to warp-related effects introduces variables that are not fully understood within existing doctrinal or scientific frameworks. The observations recorded by Inquisition agents do not provide definitive answers, but they establish a pattern of behavior and performance that deviates from expected norms without crossing into confirmed anomaly. These findings place Titus in a category that is neither fully explained nor immediately actionable, resulting in a status of monitored stability. His continued service, despite this scrutiny, reflects both his operational value and the absence of evidence necessitating intervention. As a subject of Inquisition interest, Demetrian Titus remains defined not by confirmed irregularity, but by the persistence of unanswered questions within a system that prioritizes certainty above all else. Inquisition cross-reference battle archives expand upon earlier observations by isolating specific engagements in which standard predictive models failed to account for outcomes associated with Demetrian Titus. These entries are not categorized as confirmed anomalies in the strictest sense, but rather as irregularities observed during high-intensity combat scenarios involving warp exposure, unknown entities, or breakdowns in environmental stability. Many of these reports are marked with partial seals, indicating restricted dissemination rather than full archival suppression. One of the most frequently cited cases originates from a late-phase Graia engagement, where a convergence of chaos-aligned forces triggered a localized surge in warp activity. Environmental sensors recorded fluctuations in spatial integrity, including brief intervals where distance metrics became inconsistent. Standard infantry units operating within the area reported delayed perception and misaligned targeting, with some accounts describing visual displacement of enemy positions. Within this environment, Titus is documented advancing along a direct path toward a primary threat, maintaining consistent trajectory and engagement timing. Vox and telemetry data from this encounter show minimal deviation in his response cycle. Reaction times remain within standard Astartes parameters, despite the presence of conditions that typically introduce measurable delay. Inquisition analysts reviewing the data note that his targeting solutions appear unaffected by the spatial inconsistencies recorded by surrounding units. This has led to speculation that Titus either compensates for these distortions at a cognitive level or is less susceptible to their effects. Both interpretations remain unconfirmed due to lack of direct neurological data. A separate sealed report details an encounter with a Chaos Sorcerer whose documented abilities included manipulation of sensory input and localized time distortion. Imperial forces engaged in this encounter reported asynchronous movement patterns, where enemy actions appear to occur out of sequence. Despite these conditions, Titus is recorded engaging the target with continuous motion, showing no visible hesitation or recalibration. Combat logs indicate that his strikes connect with expected timing, contradicting the temporal irregularities affecting the surrounding environment. This report includes a Mechanicus addendum noting that Titus's armor systems did not record the same level of temporal fluctuation detected by external sensors. The discrepancy between environmental readings and internal system data is flagged as a point of concern, though no immediate conclusion is drawn. The possibility of sensor error is considered but not confirmed, as multiple independent systems recorded similar anomalies. The report concludes with a recommendation for further observation under controlled conditions, though no such conditions are documented as having been implemented. Additional entries reference encounters with entities that do not conform to conventional biological or mechanical classification. In these cases, Titus engages targets exhibiting non-linear movement, partial materialization, or resistance to standard weapon effects. While such entities are not uncommon in chaos-influenced environments, the consistency with which Titus is able to engage and neutralize them remains notable. Inquisition observers document that his attacks appear to align with moments of vulnerability that are not immediately apparent in visual or sensor data. It is believed by some analysts that Titus may be responding to subtle cues not captured by standard recording equipment, such as shifts in energy patterns or micro-level environmental changes. This interpretation suggests an advanced level of situational awareness rather than an unexplained resistance. However, other analysts argue that this explanation does not fully account for the precision observed in engagements where even experienced Astartes show reduced effectiveness. As with other findings, no definitive conclusion is reached. Sealed reports also include references to engagements where data integrity is compromised. In several instances, entire segments of combat telemetry are missing or corrupted, with only partial reconstruction possible. These gaps often occur during peak warp activity or in the presence of high-value chaos entities. Despite the loss of direct data, post-engagement analysis consistently shows that Titus's objectives were achieved, with enemy forces neutralized or driven from the area. One such case involves a fortified position held by chaos-aligned forces within a subterranean complex. Initial assault attempts by Imperial Guard units resulted in heavy casualties and failure to secure entry points. Titus is later recorded entering the complex with a limited force. During the engagement, all internal recording systems experienced simultaneous failure, resulting in a complete loss of real-time data. When systems are restored, the position is found secured, with enemy resistance eliminated and minimal additional damage to the structure. Inquisition review of this event focuses on the absence of data rather than the outcome itself. Analysts note that while system failure can occur under extreme conditions, the simultaneous loss of multiple independent recording systems is statistically unlikely without a common cause. The presence of warp interference is considered the most probable explanation, though it does not fully account for the uniformity of the failure. As a result, the event is classified as a data loss anomaly, with no further action taken. Another documented encounter involves the recovery of a corrupted data relic, believed to contain partial schematics of unknown origin. Titus is recorded securing the relic during a contested engagement with Chaos forces. Subsequent analysis by the Inquisition identifies the object as contaminated, requiring immediate quarantine. Records indicate that Titus maintained physical contact with the relic for a measurable duration prior to its classification, yet no immediate adverse effects are observed. This incident generates internal discussion within the Inquisition regarding exposure thresholds and individual susceptibility. Some analysts propose that Titus's resistance may extend beyond environmental factors to include limited interaction with contaminated objects. Others caution that delayed effects cannot be ruled out, emphasizing the need for long-term monitoring. The report concludes without resolution, categorizing the event as an exposure anomaly with no confirmed consequences. There are also references to indirect encounters where Titus's presence correlates with outcomes that cannot be fully explained through recorded actions. In these cases, battlefield conditions shift rapidly following his intervention, with enemy forces exhibiting sudden loss of cohesion or retreat without clear cause. While such outcomes can occur under various circumstances, their repeated association with Titus is noted within Inquisition summaries. It is speculated in some entries that these shifts may result from psychological impact on enemy forces, particularly in the case of orc or human adversaries. However, this explanation is less applicable to chaos entities or tyrannid organisms, which do not respond to morale in conventional terms. As a result, these events remain categorized as unverified anomalies, lacking sufficient data for detailed analysis. Throughout all documented encounters, one consistent factor is the absence of negative indicators typically associated with prolonged exposure to warp-related phenomena. There are no records of mutation, ideological deviation, or behavioral instability. This absence does not eliminate concern within the Inquisition framework, but it does limit the scope of actionable response. Titus is therefore classified within a monitored category, where continued observation is prioritized over intervention. The sealed nature of many of these reports reflects the sensitivity of the information rather than a confirmed threat. Within the Inquisition, uncertainty itself is often treated as a risk factor, particularly when it involves individuals operating in proximity to chaos influence. Titus's case exemplifies this approach, where unexplained resilience is documented alongside consistent loyalty and effectiveness. In cumulative analysis, the anomalies recorded in relation to Demetrian Titus do not form a coherent pattern that can be definitively explained through existing doctrine or scientific understanding. They are instead a collection of irregularities observed under extreme conditions, each contributing to a broader profile that resists simple classification. These findings reinforce the Inquisition's position that Titus represents a subject of interest rather than immediate concern. His continued deployment in active combat zones, despite the presence of these anomalies, indicates a calculated acceptance of uncertainty in favor of operational necessity. The Imperium, faced with constant and escalating threats, prioritizes effectiveness where it can be confirmed. In the case of Demetrian Titus, effectiveness is consistently demonstrated, even as the underlying factors contributing to his performance remain partially obscured. The documented encounters and sealed reports therefore serve not as evidence of deviation, but as records of phenomena that challenge existing frameworks without violating them. Titus remains within the bounds of Imperial loyalty and function, yet operates at the edge of what can be fully explained. This position ensures that his actions will continue to be observed, analysed, and recorded even as they contribute to the ongoing defence of the Imperium. The highest classification strata within Inquisition archives concerning Demetrian Titus are fragmented, cross-referenced, and in several instances partially redacted under multi-ordo authority. These files do not present a singular conclusion or directive. Instead, they compile long-term observational data, internal debates, and conditional assessments regarding Titus's continued service within the Imperium. Access to these records is restricted, typically requiring authorization from multiple Inquisition branches, indicating the level of caution applied to his case. Within these classified entries, Titus is consistently categorized under monitored status rather than active investigation. This distinction is significant. It reflects a subject who has triggered analytical concern without meeting the criteria for containment, interrogation, or sanction. The primary factor influencing this classification is the absence of actionable evidence indicating corruption, despite repeated exposure to conditions that would normally justify immediate intervention. One of the central themes within these files is the concept of controlled deviation. Inquisition analysts use this term to describe individuals or phenomena that diverge from expected parameters without crossing into confirmed threat categories. Titus's resistance to warp-induced effects is placed within this framework. It is not denied, but neither is it fully accepted as benign. Instead, it is treated as a variable requiring continuous observation across extended timeframes. Cross-Ordo commentary reveals differing interpretations of this deviation. Elements within the Order Malleus consider the possibility that Titus represents an example of heightened resistance that could, if understood, provide insight into combating chaos influence. These discussions remain theoretical and are accompanied by repeated warnings regarding the risks of attempting to replicate or analyze such traits without comprehensive understanding. the lack of controlled experimental data prevents any advancement beyond speculative consideration. In contrast, representatives of the Order Hereticus adopt a more cautious stance, emphasizing that unexplained resilience may mask latent corruption or delayed manifestation of warp influence. From this perspective, the absence of symptoms is not evidence of purity, but a potential indicator of deeper, less detectable alteration. These analysts advocate for continued monitoring with emphasis on long-term behavioral consistency and periodic re-evaluation under controlled conditions. Despite these differing perspectives, there is agreement on one critical point. Titus's operational value currently outweighs the theoretical risks associated with his condition. Classified deployment records indicate that he continues to be assigned to high-risk engagements where his presence contributes to mission success. This decision reflects a broader Inquisition practice of balancing potential threat against immediate necessity, particularly in the context of ongoing large-scale conflicts. Several files include detailed timelines correlating Titus's deployments with recorded warp activity levels. These timelines show repeated overlap between his presence and environments of elevated anomaly density. In each case, his performance remains stable, and no escalation of irregular indicators is observed over time. This consistency is noted as both reassuring and problematic. Reassuring in that no deterioration is detected, problematic in that the underlying cause remains unidentified. There are also references to controlled observation periods conducted between major deployments. During these intervals, Titus undergoes standard purity screenings, psychological evaluations, and equipment diagnostics. Results from these evaluations consistently fall within acceptable parameters. No deviations in gene seed stability, cognitive function, or ideological alignment are recorded. These findings reinforce his classification as stable, though they do not resolve the broader questions surrounding his resilience. A subset of classified reports addresses the potential implications of Titus's condition if left unexamined. Some analysts suggest that failure to understand such anomalies may limit the Imperium's ability to adapt to evolving threats. Others counter that premature investigation, particularly involving invasive or experimental procedures, could compromise a valuable asset without guaranteed benefit. This debate remains unresolved, reflecting the inherent tension between knowledge acquisition and risk management within the Inquisition. There are also indirect references to similar cases, though none are documented with the same level of detail or consistency. These references suggest that Titus may not be entirely unique, but rather part of a small, poorly understood category of individuals exhibiting atypical resistance. However, the lack of comprehensive data on these cases prevents meaningful comparison, leaving Titus as the most thoroughly documented example within current archives. Final assessment entries within these classified files adopt a structured but non-conclusive tone. Titus is described as a reliable and effective commander whose actions consistently align with Imperial objectives. His exposure to warp-related phenomena exceeds standard thresholds, yet no corresponding indicators of corruption are present. This combination places him in a category that is both valuable and uncertain, requiring ongoing observation without immediate restriction. From an Inquisition perspective, this balance defines his status. He's neither cleared nor condemned, neither fully understood nor considered a threat. Instead, he exists within a monitored continuum, where each new deployment provides additional data points for analysis. His continued survival and effectiveness contribute to this dataset, gradually shaping a profile that may, over time, yield clearer conclusions. The final thoughts recorded within these archives do not attempt to resolve the uncertainty surrounding Demetrian Titus. Instead, they acknowledge it as an inherent aspect of his case. In a system that prioritizes certainty, his existence represents a controlled exception. This exception is tolerated because it produces measurable benefits and does not currently introduce measurable harm. In conclusion, the Inquisition's perspective on Demetrian Titus is defined by cautious acceptance. He is recognized as a loyal servant of the Imperium, whose capabilities enhance the effectiveness of Imperial forces in complex and hazardous environments. At the same time, he remains under continuous observation due to factors that cannot yet be fully explained. This dual status ensures that his actions will continue to be documented, analysed, and reassessed as new data becomes available. The classified files do not close his case. They maintain it in a state of active observation, where certainty has not yet been achieved, but necessity dictates continued trust.